Good afternoon, everyone. It's George Kriza, welcoming David Kurlan to our discussion center here this afternoon. David is one of the most noteworthy and well-known and respected experts in evaluating sales individuals and sales managers. And over the past number of years, David has developed very sophisticated methodologies that can be leveraged by anyone who owns a business and is trying to drive sales in their sales organization in a much more clear and objective way. I, in fact, got to meet Dave, and I went to one of your seminars probably 15, 18 years ago at this point, Dave. And also, I utilized your testing methodologies at the time in my own organization, which was MTC Performance at the time.
You're making us both sound old.
Yes, but you're younger than yesterday, Dave. So keep that in mind.
On the inside.
So at any rate, welcome, David. And I really look forward to our discussion because quite clearly, this is an area that is so very, very important in operating any business these days. And I think to really help our audience understand the magnitude of the problem, I'm going to ask you to talk about this initial slide first, and then we'll go into a series of questions that will wrap around how to deal with these problems. So Dave, tell us your take on this situation. You are looking at the accurate and predictive slide, correct?
Yes. And that's Objective Management Group's infographic on just how accurate and just how predictive our sales candidate assessment is. So out of all the 2.2 million salespeople we've assessed and evaluated over the last 32 years, there is a clear top 6% that's just head and shoulders better than anybody else. So that's what the first graphic is. 6% of all salespeople are elite performers. And you don't necessarily want them for your company, but there are roles that they're ideal for, such as selling real expensive capital equipment or services to the C-suite of a major corporation against incredible competition. When your price is higher, you need one of those top 6%ers to succeed in that role, especially if the sales cycle is 18 to 24 months. Now, the next two, the last two numbers on the right, the 92 and the 75. When OMG doesn't recommend a candidate, we say not recommended for this role, and our brilliant client decides that they know better and they hire the salesperson anyway, 75% of those salespeople that were not recommended but hired fail inside of 6 months. And then the 92% number is the opposite of that. When we do recommend a candidate and the company does their due diligence and ends up hiring that candidate, 92% of those salespeople rise to the top half of the sales team within 12 months. And the 74% is just the reality. We know that if we're being kind, half of all reps don't hit quota every year. That's if we're being kind. But a lot of companies don't report their data. A lot of companies don't get these digital surveys. A lot of small and medium businesses aren't included in the surveys, and they have more salespeople failing than anybody. So it's probably closer to the 74% number. And the reality is we have this top 6% and then another 15% that's pretty strong. And then everybody else sucks. So 74% of all salespeople, and you see it in the sales organizations.
Don't
you
hold
can
back,
see
Dave.
it.
Tell it like it is.
They are crappy. I won't hold back, George. I've been doing this way too long. I'm not worried about getting canceled. I'm not going to be politically correct. I'm just going to tell it like it is.
I would just like to make my own couple of comments on this. You know, I operated MTC Performance for 25 years. And, you know, we I guess a couple of times we had two salespeople, but generally it was one salesperson representing us. And we just had we finally found a couple that were pretty good, but the majority of them, it was like a string of failures. So I identify with this so powerfully, you can't even imagine. And I guess I'd have to say, since I was originally the primary salesperson, I'll give myself some credit. And over the years, I've begun teaching consultative selling myself. But it's it's the whole enchilada of skill sets that wrap together that produce success. And failing to really understand those skill sets and pick the right person is catastrophic, as you're indicating. But without a doubt, it's a challenge to find and hire and keep great salespeople. Now, I've developed a few questions as a foundation for our discussion. And I would say this as a starting point, Dave. What are some of the typical problems that people have when they're hiring sales team members? And separately, sales managers, because the two are different, right? They don't have the same characteristics. So what are some of the typical problems a person that's not using your testing methodologies runs into?
It's a combination of things. It's not only that they're not using our sales candidate assessment, they're also not using any kind of a formal, proven sales recruiting process that gets the right results. So they're not attracting enough candidates. They're not attracting the right candidates. Whatever candidates they get, they're just trying to go with the best. And they don't really know what it takes to succeed in the role they have, but they like a personality that one salesperson has, and they hire them and say, what do we have to lose? And they flip the coin, and the coin comes up tails. They called heads, and they hire them anyhow, and they fail. Because there's just no science being applied to either the process or the selection criteria.
One of the things that I found, which is deceptively difficult, is people recommending people to be hired. So, I've been in sales in one way or another my entire life, and I was a manufacturer's rep, and I worked for major corporations like Sony and Apple. And so, I have a lot of sales experience, and I was always quite successful. And then I know so many people, they'll say, talk to Fred, talk to Mark, talk to whoever it is. And they'll walk in and, they've held high-level jobs in great companies. You could name, the top 50 technology companies. We were in high tech at the time. And boy, it sure sounds terrific. And they were a VP or a senior VP, and they'd walk into my company, which was a highly conceptual sell, an intangible sell. You may or may not recall, MTC Performance was a channel sales incentive company. And so we would be calling on the channel marketing department and explaining the benefits of our software and the way that we could be a complete managed service to run sales incentive programs. So, this is not like selling widgets, right? It's a whole different animal. And
you could be successful in one role, in one company, in one industry, and it doesn't translate. Because why were you successful? One company, they had great marketing and salespeople were just order takers. Another company was the low price leader, so salespeople ended up just being order takers. Another company was the brand name leader, and everybody gravitated toward them, and you couldn't go wrong buying from them. So they were just order takers. And then they go to a company that's an underdog. An underdog isn't any one of those things. And maybe they have a new technology, maybe they have a new product, maybe it's a new company, maybe they have a story tell. They're more expensive. They're different. They're not the leader. They're not the automatic choice. And salespeople have to overcome resistance, sell value, change people's minds, be persuasive, ask a lot of questions, position the company properly, be the value. And 75% of salespeople can't do that. They've never done that.
And one of the things that people will tell you, and I'd love to get your observation on this. So many people will say that sales is a relationship business, and I'm not going to suggest that it's not a relationship business. However, merely maintaining a relationship, again, to your point, let's say you're Sony and you're calling on Sony's existing dealer structure, right? And then, your job is to wine and dine the owner and take orders. And it's very cut and dried the way you approach this. And building that relationship and making them feel valued is extraordinarily important, but it actually has almost nothing to do with selling in the first place.
That's right. There's no selling. Maybe you're selling them on continuing to like Sony and you, but they're not going to drop Sony. That would be cutting off their nose to spite their face. And they're going to continue buying Sony stuff, whether they like you or not. It's just easier if they like you. And you make them feel special. The wining and dining is the reward for continuing to put their trust and faith in Sony. But you're right. That's not selling. That's not walking in cold to a company that wasn't planning on buying anything, and never mind buying it from you, and convincing them to spend $250,000.
Yeah. And so also, as we look at a number of titles in organizations of individuals that often fall under the banner of sales or report to sales, I think one of the things we find is that the actual jobs are very different. You have, let's say, people that deliver professional services. You have people that actually go out and do new client acquisition. You have people that are account managers running existing business and trying to build, land and expand, and so on and so forth. And then there are people that manage all these activities.
And there's a lot of new specialty roles like BDRs who just work the top of the funnel. Some of them work inbound leads. Some of them are working outbound. You also have audience segmentation. There's salespeople for calling on enterprise-sized companies, and salespeople for calling on large companies, and salespeople for calling on small and medium-sized businesses. You also have salespeople organized by verticals. You also have salespeople still organized by territory. You have salespeople organized by the alphabet. It's crazy. There's too much specialization, and it's just making it worse.
Yeah, so the skill sets are actually dimensionally quite different depending on the go-to-market.
Which role they're in. Yep.
Yeah. So before we get into the testing specifically, one other thought I'd like to get from you. What would you say is the primary difference between someone that's managing sales versus someone that's in sales?
Well, that's the $1 million question, because most companies get that wrong. The person managing sales in a lot of companies is still expected to be a salesperson, and still expected to hit a quota, and still expected to manage their existing accounts. And it leaves little time for managing. And then their concept of what managing is very different from what my concept of managing is. The number one goal of a sales manager is to coach their salespeople up, to make them better, to make them more self-sufficient, to make them more effective, to coach them on opportunities, to coach them through pipelines, to get the right forecasts, to push them, to challenge them, and to hold them accountable. And what most sales managers do is, spreadsheets and call reports and busy work.
In that same spirit, would you say that a sales manager should or shouldn't be the one to walk in to help a salesperson actually close deals?
That's a good question. If that salesperson's a rookie, they should be there at least to support that rookie. And if the rookie gets into trouble, bail them out. But we see it so often where the sales manager sees themselves as the white knight. And you just cue it up, tee it up for me, and I'll come in and close it for you, baby. And that's not sales management, that's selling. And that's, taking credit for what the team does when they're successful, and those same people blame the team when the team is unsuccessful. And it shouldn't be about the sales manager. Sales manager's there to support the salespeople and coach them up, not close their deals for them.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
No, I think that's a really valuable opinion. Yeah, one of the things as we get into some of the testing that you do, before we talk about the testing, I'd like to throw that graphic up if we can to talk a little bit about.
We can do this.
Yeah, to talk about the qualities that you have identified that go into sales success. So let me share my screen yet again, and I'd like you to walk us through this, because I think this is poorly understood by the typical person, whether a CEO of a small organization or a sales manager, has a very poor grasp of the multiple dimensions that work into success. So I'm going to put that up now, and I'd like you to please walk us through that.
So this slide has 21 sales core competencies that OMG measures, but it's also an old version of the 21 sales core competencies. One of the cool things about OMG compared to every other assessment company is the companies that produce personality assessments and behavioral styles assessments developed those core assessments in the 50s and the 60s, and they haven't changed anything except the way the reports look. Our assessment is sales specific, and it's built by sales experts. And as selling changes, the things we focus on and measure change with it. So if you look at this, the current 21 sales core competencies are in 3 buckets. Will to sell, which you could also call grit or heart. Sales DNA, which is the combination of strengths that support sales process, sales methodology, sales strategy, and sales tactics, and tactical selling competencies. And we've made changes to the tactical selling competencies as the pandemic arose, as virtual selling took over, as technology became a bigger part. So I'll clarify what the slide shows with what the current reality is. But first, will to sell. That's a salesperson's willingness to do whatever it takes, their commitment, and how badly they want to achieve greater sales success is their desire. And their outlook is how they feel about themselves, as a salesperson, as a person, how they feel about the people they work with and the people they sell to, and whether or not they take responsibility for their results. Those 4 competencies plus motivation, the 5th competency, make up will to sell. And that's really important, because if a salesperson doesn't have strong motivation, desire, and commitment, and they already work for you, they're not going to change. They're not going to get any better. It's basically what you see is what you get. And if they're lacking commitment or desire and they're a candidate for a role that you're hiring for, you never want to hire someone who lacks desire or commitment. That their best days are behind them.
So, and if you don't mind, and I'm going to always defer to you as the expert, but I'm going to editorialize a little bit as we go. So I would say that this first box, will to sell, is probably the way most people come at sales, right? Is are you that stormtrooper, kamikaze salesperson that will do anything they need to get the deal? Are you willing to take no prisoners? Are you willing to work the hours? Are you willing to do the travel and be positive, right? So those are things that are very traditional. Now, as we go into this sales DNA, and as I learned about your system, in my own company, I found these to be so powerful, this DNA portion, and some people just flunk this right out of the chute. Now, for example, no need for approval. I'm a wonderful example of a person with no need for approval. But there are so few people that fit that category, right? And when you have a need for approval, what's the first thing you're going to do? K, right? You're going to want them to like you. And wanting to like you works against being successful, doesn't it? You want to give a little color commentary on that?
Sure. So generally speaking, sales DNA represents the blind spots, the things you don't see in an interview, the things you don't see in your existing salespeople. These are the hidden weaknesses that sabotage their performance. So salespeople who need to be liked, they have trouble asking questions, especially asking either a lot of questions or asking a tough question or having a difficult conversation or pushing back. And when you start talking about pushing back, you start to hear the challenger sale, right? Because that's one of the things that they put on a pedestal is a salesperson's ability to push back, being distinguished from everybody else who doesn't push back. So the challenger sale, I don't know about you, but a lot of my personal clients previously had the challenger folks in to teach the challenger method, and their sales team couldn't do it. And that's because the challenger requires sales DNA, overall sales DNA of 82 or better. Now, what percentage of salespeople have an 82 or better? 5%. We're back to that elite top 5% again. So yeah, need for approval is huge. 59% of salespeople need to be liked. And that shouldn't be surprising because, nobody grows up saying, I'm going to go into sales when I get older. And it's not even on the career list in high school. Sales is always missing from the career opportunity night. There's nobody representing it. I volunteered to talk about that at my son's former high school last year in 2021. And they said, yeah, we never even thought of that. Sure. And it was virtual. So I was there in my Zoom room for the 2 sessions and nobody showed up. Nobody. It's not a consideration for anybody going through high school or college. Everybody gets into sales by accident. And the accident is, hey, you seem to have a personality for selling. Everybody likes you. Why don't you go into sales? And it's the wrong reason for going into sales because everybody likes you. Chances are, if everybody likes you, it's because you need them to. But there is a difference between being likable, people like you, and needing people to like you, which is
more emotional weakness.
Fatal in sales.
Yeah. And this supportive buy cycle, this is another thing I found fascinating. And again, you feel free to correct me if I don't convey something properly, but a supportive buy cycle is you're in your own life when you go out to buy something, whether it's a car or something for your business or the way you put things together. You're not afraid to spend money, right? You live the fact that you should live well, you should have great things in your life, and they're worth it. And if you don't believe that yourself, how in the world are you going to be able to sell a high value product at top dollar?
Exactly.
All right.
So that's one element of it. There's actually 6 elements of a supportive buy cycle. And there's a direct correlation between. I'm sorry?
That's why we need to see you. You have it all nailed. Go ahead. What are they?
There's a direct correlation between how people buy and the pushback they'll accept. So the elements of a supportive buy cycle, basically, if you want ideal sales outcomes, then you need to buy in such a way that supports ideal sales outcomes. So it's whether or not you shop around, whether or not you comparison shop, whether or not you look for the lowest price or you buy value, whether or not you think it over or you can just make a decision when it's time, whether or not you do research, whether or not you think this much is a lot of money or it's some higher amount of money. And it's whether or not you like being sold to or not. And salespeople who buy in a way that supports ideal sales outcomes are far more effective than salespeople who don't. Again, a lot of salespeople have non-supported buy cycles, but when they fix it, when they start buying in such a way that it supports their sales career, that there is a 50% increase in the revenue that they generate.
Yes, and the next one, like comfortable talking about money. So it's amazing how uncomfortable some people are talking about money, which is a problem. And I think wrapped together with that, and I don't know whether this is exactly the way you categorize it, but what is a lot of money? You know, right? So is 5,000 a lot of money? 10,000, 100,000, a million? What's a lot of money? And you know, depending if your product sells for $50,000 a month subscription, and you think that $1,000 a month is is a lot of money, you got a problem, right? It's I mean,
right.
The whole
That's
thing.
right. Every time a prospect says, "Wow, that's a lot of money," or "That's a lot more than I thought it was going to be," that salesperson's dead in the water. They can't fight for it because it's not coming from conviction. Yeah, a lot of people were also brought up being told or taught that it's not polite to ask people about money. So there's a point in the sales process where we have to make sure people can afford to buy and spend money on what you're selling and what you're going to propose and what you're going to recommend. But salespeople who are taught that it's not polite to ask about money stumble and bumble their way through that step and end up for the sake of being smooth, skipping it. And therefore they end up making a lot of unqualified proposals and presentations and quotes.
It's, and I'm going to maybe go a little bit fast through some of this, but it's amazing too on this next one, controls emotions. Having watched the dynamic of so many people in my own organization and people I've worked with in other companies, watching them side by side, it's fascinating how much emotion is involved in selling. And someone who can't control their emotions, it's a deal breaker, right?
Well, if you think about you mentioned earlier in our discussion that you teach salespeople how to sell consultatively. And the two most important skills in consultative selling are listening and asking questions. So if you have need for approval, you can't ask questions. And if you get emotional, you can't listen. Because what emotional really means is that you're talking to yourself. You're panicking and you have a voice in your head going, "Oh no," or, "Well, why did they say that? Why'd they ask that?" Or, "Uh-oh." But when you're listening to yourself, you can't listen to the prospect anymore. So what controls emotions really means, and we actually changed the name to reflect this, it's really about your ability to stay in the moment, right here, right now. You're not thinking about what happened. You're not thinking about what's coming. It's just right here, right now, staying in the moment.
I'm so glad you brought that up because once again, I've lived this for so long at this point. I watch people, they can't stop themselves from talking. The prospect is ready to give them the keys to the kingdom of information, and they interrupt the prospect and go somewhere they shouldn't, right? But anyway, yes, this concept of silence is so difficult for so many salespeople. Silence is so powerful. As long as you're asking the right sequence of questions, which is dynamic, right? You can't predict where the conversation is going to go. You walk in there and you might have 6 questions ready to go. You may only get to 2 or 3, and then the conversation, you either have to bring it back or where they take it is more productive. but you certainly have to be willing to hear what the client thinks is most important. It may not match what you're expecting, but you have to hear it.
Those have changed, and they're more obvious to people. Everybody knows what hunting is. Posturing is no longer one of the 21 sales core competencies. Relationship building comes next, and then consultative selling skills, which we've talked about, and then value selling is now one of the 21, and reaching decision makers is now one of the 21. The data showed recently, over the last couple of years, that salespeople who can actually reach the decision maker are 341% more likely to close the business than salespeople who don't. Obviously, qualifying, presenting, and closing are all important. And then we have sales technology, which includes CRM savvy, video proficient, and remote selling capabilities, virtual selling. And then the last one would be sales process, which without a solid sales process that's both milestone centric and customer facing, that supports a consultative and a value selling methodology, salespeople aren't going to be very effective. So that's your 21.
You have developed comprehensive testing that finds these qualities, or whether an individual does or doesn't have these qualities. I'm curious, to whatever extent you care to share, how is it that you were able to develop such effective testing vehicles as you have?
Well, the Beatles were an overnight sensation, right?
Yes.
In 1963, suddenly the Beatles selling millions of records, but they had 10,000 hours of performing in Europe before they ever became an overnight sensation. It's the same with OMG. I've been developing, I was in development for this product for 5 years before we formed Objective Management Group. And we've been developing the assessments and the evaluations for 32 years. We haven't stopped. We haven't finished. We're not there yet. It's constantly improving. It's constantly becoming more accurate. It's constantly becoming more predictive. So, we took a sales approach. We know what it takes to be successful in selling. We figured out what those competencies had to be. And then when it comes to sales candidates and hiring salespeople, we customize the competencies to the role. It's not one size fits all. I mean, to a certain degree, selling is selling and selling. But as industries and businesses and marketplaces and decision makers and products and services change, there are different things that are required to successfully sell those things to different people against different competition, and calling on different decision makers at different levels of companies at different price points. So it requires different emphasis on different of the 21 sales core competencies in order to succeed. So we're able to customize it so that we're identifying the right people for a particular selling role. And that's why it's so accurate. The ideal salesperson for an industrial distributor that's selling batteries to marinas, to golf courses, to wheelchair dealers, that salesperson has different requirements than the one we talked about earlier, who's going to sell 7-figure capital equipment to the C-suite of Fortune 1000 companies in an 18-month sales cycle against incredibly difficult competition, and they're priced higher. Now, those are two totally different salespeople at two ends of the spectrum. Our overall number for a salesperson is sales percentile. So if you have a sales percentile of 80, then you're better than 80% of all the salespeople in the world. or at least our population, which is 2.2 million. So that salesperson who needs to sell the capital equipment to the Fortune 1000, that's going to require a sales percentile of 95. The salesperson who's going to sell batteries for the industrial battery distributor probably only requires a sales percentile of 65. So there's a sliding scale for every sales role, and it depends a lot on who they're selling to, not what they're selling, and who they're up against, and how difficult it is to make that sale. And so it requires a different level of what's an ideal fit, and that's what we can measure.
So when you engage with a client, or if you have distributors of your product as well?
We partner with sales consultancies and sales training firms and sales gurus and sales authors and sales coaches, and they make up our worldwide network of OMG certified partners.
So whether it's you or them, when they engage with an end client, they go through that configuration of the tool to match the requirements of the particular style and vertical market and so on, as you just described. When should a company use the test? Should they use the test before they meet with the candidate for the first time? Should they do it right after the first interview that looks positive, or before the final interview? What's the optimal time to deploy the test?
Well, there's three factors. You want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to be EEOC compliant in the United States. So let's start with EEOC. These days, as soon as someone has sent you an electronic resume, they're a candidate. And EEOC guidelines say that if you're going to use an assessment, not only does it have to be validated and reliable and consistent in its findings, you have to use it on all your candidates. You can't cherry pick your candidates. So that rules out having a final pool of candidates that you assess. You have to assess all your candidates. So that's the top of the funnel. They don't all have to take it, but they must all be asked to take it. So to be EEOC compliant, everybody gets assessed. Now, if you're assessing at the top of the recruiting funnel, they've gone online and completed your online application, the very next step should be they take the sales candidate assessment. And now you know which candidates are right for the role and which ones aren't. You know who will succeed in the role and which ones won't. So depending on the difficulty of the role, anywhere from 15 to 50% of the candidates are going to be recommended. So you don't have to deal with the candidates that aren't recommended. So you've saved all that time. You don't have to look at their resumes. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to email with them. You don't have to call them. You focus on the candidates who are recommended. And those are the candidates you can have a phone call with, a quick phone call, 5 minutes, to make sure they sound like somebody you'd want representing your company. A lot of candidates, you hear them on the phone, you wouldn't want them talking to anybody. You wouldn't want them to talk to a customer or a prospect, and you'd get rid of those. So you're going to talk to them for how they sound, but you're also going to talk to them and make sure they have the right kind of background that would lend itself to being successful in the role. So now you know from the assessment that they have the ability to succeed in the role. You've talked to them, you like how they sound, you like their background. Now you can schedule them for a first interview. That's when you can actually look at the resume for the first time. So you've saved a bunch of time. And the way you save money is we price our assessments on a flat fee. So it's based on the number of people a company is going to hire over 12 months. So it's X dollars. That's it. You've controlled your costs, and you can assess as many outside sales candidates. By outside, I mean candidates from outside your company.
Understood.
Not outside salespeople. You can assess as many candidates as it takes until you've hired the number of salespeople you signed up to hire.
Again, I'm glad you brought that out, because so that puts the cost under control, as opposed to a flat number like $400 or $500 for everyone you send it
or
to.
assessment. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
very
that
expensive.
gives you a financial disincentive to do it the right way. Then
Right.
you want a really small group of candidates that you're going to assess. And as luck would have it, the candidates you fell in love with aren't recommended. And the candidates you didn't fall in love with probably would have been. And that goes to the point of how badly companies have screwed up hiring. 50% of reps fail to meet quota because of sales selection problems. They hired the wrong people. They've got the wrong sales managers in place. They hired the wrong salespeople. They don't onboard anybody correctly. And then they don't train them, coach them the right way. It's bad.
I would assume that the biggest change in reaching customers these days is, in fact, the use of social media. And so many people are using LinkedIn, for an example, to get through to their target audience. In your view, how does that impact the skill set, and just how much does an effective salesperson have to be outstanding at utilizing social media that way?
Great question, George. And I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, you can connect with prospects that you might not have been able to connect with otherwise. They might not have picked up their phone. They might not have responded to an email, and maybe they'll respond to an in-mail in LinkedIn. Maybe. Better, you be a subject matter expert and they see what you've been writing about and they reach out to you. Then LinkedIn is serving as a powerful tool to help you connect with prospects. But the worst part about LinkedIn is it makes salespeople lazy, and it makes them reliant on hiding behind the screen instead of doing something smart like picking up the freaking telephone and making a call, because there is so much email noise. There is so much text message noise. There is so much in-mail noise. There is so much tweeting noise. There is so much just noise. It's really hard to get through it all. It's really, really hard to get through it all. I'll give you a great example. My blog. I'm sure you've read at least one of the 2,000 articles that I've written on that blog. I have around 10,000 subscribers to the blog, in addition to the organic traffic that Google drives to the blog. Now, back when I had 3,000 subscribers, the blog would send out an automatic notification via email every time I published an article, which back then was probably 2 or 3 times a week. And out of the 3,000 people who got that notification, 1,500 of them probably clicked right through to the article. Today, there's so much noise that out of that 10,000 people who might be notified when I write a new article, which is now probably only 2 or 3 times a month, probably only 300 click through to the article. So why is that? Either my articles suck, or they're no longer relevant, or the people who signed up are no longer in a role that makes it worth reading, or they're like me. And they get so many freaking emails all day long that you spend a half hour 3 times a day just going delete, 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 delete. Just literally spend an hour and a half a day deleting everything that isn't crucial.
Well,
that's how much noise there is.
Just to make you feel better, I think it's the latter, because you put out an amazing material. You are a true expert in your field, and I am quite convinced you're one of the foremost leaders in evaluation of sales candidates and selling methodology. So if they aren't reading it, if they have if sales,
they're lost.
Yeah, if sales plays an important part in the organization and they're responsible for sales, they ought to be reading it, because there's just tons to benefit in doing.
To be clear, over the lifetime of an article, several thousand people will probably read it, and an article that gets spread around will probably be seen by 40 or 50,000 people. But I just wanted to make a point about how much noise there is, and
no doubt
how much better it would be to use a phone, any phone.
And, in preparing for our discussion, I look, one feature I like in your website is you have I don't know if it's a top 20 most read articles, most popular articles that you've written in your blog.
Probably top 10.
And, I read three of them, one of which was the Nutcracker. The other one was about the core competencies, and the other was the impact of social selling. So, you've just got a lot to say and a lot of value that you're delivering.
You haven't done in all honesty, you haven't done a very good job shutting me up.
Well,
I have a lot to say and I'm saying it.
I feel like I've jumped in a few times, I will say this also, which I said earlier, but I'm going to just say it one more time. As I learned about your methodology, there was just revelation after revelation as to the why thing, the why behind why people are failing. And so, which actually brings us to an interesting question. Maybe we'll make this our last major question.
Good, because I'm a wind up, Dave, and I run out of energy at the hour mark.
Can you train salespeople? Can you really train salespeople? And I don't care if it's Sandler or PSS or Trade Tech or whoever are these large
line selling.
Yeah, these large offerers of training programs. Can you really train salespeople, or is the DNA so powerful that you just better pick it right in the first place?
Well, it's always going to be better if you pick the right salespeople at selection time. No question about it. If you pick salespeople who are going to be productive and be effective out of the gate, that's the best solution. But can you train salespeople? Yes. If they want to be trained, if they want to get better, if sales management will coach them, because if I'm training and I'm working with a company for an hour every other week, I'm impacting them 2 whole hours a month. What are they doing? The other 158 hours, they need to be coached by the sales manager. Otherwise, what I'm doing with them for 2 hours a month isn't going to make a lot of difference. No matter how good I am, no matter how much we demonstrate it through role play, no matter how results focused we are, no matter how entertaining it is, they've got to be coached, and the sales manager's got to support the content they're being trained on, the methodology and the process, and they've got to be able to role play. So the most crucial training is the training of the sales managers. So can the sales managers be trained to become good, effective sales coaches? That's the real question.
Yeah. And so the coaching is critical for a sales manager, as is his willingness to hold the salespeople accountable for implementing the methodology.
Earlier than that, accountable to change. What'd you learn from the training? I learned this, this, and this. Okay, you've got 2 weeks. Show me that you can go out and do that, and that.
Well, there's just so much profound territory, Dave, in all of this that we've talked about. Let me ask you this as sort of a sum up question. I would say there's going to be 3 different audiences that may watch this video. And of course, we're hoping there's thousands that do, but
your family, my family, and who's the third?
But audience number 1, in my opinion, is a CEO who's responsible ultimately for the success of his organization or her organization. Sales.
And we won't hold their attention long enough. Who's audience number 2?
Sales leaders, sales managers, and then salespeople themselves. So are there any 1 or 2 key takeaways for each of those groups?
Yeah. CEOs, if you're still with us at this point, your biggest frustration is the forecast, right? Your sales leader says, we're going to do $8 million this month. And you need him to do $10 million this month. And he comes in at $6 million this month. He comes in at 75%, and we're celebrating $6 million. Why is that? Is it the sales leader? Is it the criteria for coming up with the forecast? Is it the pipeline? Is it the quality of the opportunities in the pipeline? Is it the sales managers? Is it the salespeople? Does it go back to selection? Does it go back to onboarding? Does it go back to accountability? Does it go back to lack of coaching? You're looking at forecasts and budgets and why that isn't working. But you've got to figure out why any one or all of those things that leads to that forecast is broken, and fix that. You can't fix the forecast if you don't fix the people. Sales leaders, stop making it okay that your salespeople aren't getting better and stronger. Stop making it okay that your sales managers aren't coaching and great at coaching. Just checking in with your salespeople isn't coaching. Finding out what's on their calendar today is not coaching. Finding out what's in the pipeline and what's going to close is not coaching. Make your sales managers coach and make sure they learn how to role play opportunities. And finally,
hold on. And so just to that one point, because I've been in that situation so many times. Coaching is not some abstract process either. You need to understand what that salesperson's actually doing. So let's say you ride along, and this is very common for a sales manager to ride along with a salesperson. Well,
years ago it was.
Well, okay, now you're riding along on Zoom, whatever.
Yep.
But
the Zoom ride along.
I mean, you're not there to do the talking. The salesperson should conduct the sales meeting the same way they would without you there, so you can observe what in the world's going on. And based on that, you have quantitative information on how you can coach them. In the absence of that, who knows? You don't like their suit that day. That's a terrible way to do that. I actually had a sales manager one time when I was with Sony. He said, look like a salesman, George. And I looked very professional. I don't know what he was expecting out of me, but the way he was measuring success was a very different way from the way I was measuring success.
Sounds pretty shallow to me.
Yeah.
And salespeople.
Yeah.
Takeaway for salespeople. You got to get this. At whatever level you're performing at, maybe it's been okay for you, and maybe it's been okay for your sales manager, and maybe it's been okay for the sales leader, but it's not really okay. You got to figure out what the gap is between where you are today and what it's going to take to get into the top 5% and recommit to doing that. This is about being the best you can be, not going through the motions. So stop going through the motions and take it seriously and become awesome.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been an incredible conversation with a never-ending stream of great information, and we've only scratched the surface. So I think what we'd want to share with our audience today is, how does someone find Dave Kurlan and take advantage of all of your expertise?
Someone can find Dave Kurlan by visiting my blog, which is OMG, like, oh my God, but we were OMG before that expression was popular. OMG for Objective Management Group, omghub.com. There's 2,000 articles that will get you into how I think. And they're all entertaining. I use a lot of analogies, and you won't be sorry you visited, and you'll learn something from every article. If you really want to contact me, you can reach out over LinkedIn or Dave Kurlan, Kurlan, or you can email me, dkurlan@objectivemanagement.com.
Once again, thank you very much. And I'm going to do the same for myself, if you don't mind. Your host today is George Kriza, CEO of Challenging Decisions, LLC. We are a consultancy designed at assisting CEOs and senior managers to solve big problems in their organization, problems that they struggle with, problems that they may have tried to fix in various ways up to this point and done so unsuccessfully. And we're here to help. You can reach me at the diamond1, the word diamond, the number 1, at challengingdecisions.com. That's the website as well, challengingdecisions.com. And you can call me 312-320-7760. We'd welcome a conversation. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks again, Dave, for a tremendous conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me, George. I had fun.